And you're sort of what you're seeing now with the squad that Tuchel's using very well is probably the after effect of years of shifting direction and course. I know you've discussed on, I think it was Alex Goldberg's podcast about sort of the way that there isn't really great infrastructure behind the head coach to deal with the turbulence of sacking a head coach. And, one in Antonio Conte, who wants to maybe play a bit more counter-attacking, wants to play a three-back system, wants to sign maybe older players within his team that the club don't want. Then you go Maurizio Sarri, who's the complete opposite to that, has, very much refined one style of play, very strict one style of play, positional play, possession-based football that requires certain players within a system. Then you go to Lampard, a very young, inexperienced coach that's still discovering what he wants to do in his career. Now you found the right blend in Thomas Tuchel, but I just also wonder with some of these players, they could work for us. In the past, there's been certain players who've come in and failed, like maybe a Bakayoko, who I know some people just don't think is good at all. But I sometimes wonder if these players come in and it's a case of us not knowing what we want to do with them. Not knowing what we actually, why do we want that player? Why are we buying that? It's a bit like, why do we want Maurizio Sarri? It was always my question about Sarri. Do we want to bring him in because the club wants to switch from a counter-attacking style to a possession-based style and they feel that this is the best guy for it? Or is it because we've got this problem with Antonio Conte and we need to get him out the club and, oh, look, this guy, Sarri, has got a lot of, he's the hipster guy across Europe. And I know I sound very naive saying that, but it's the way it worked out to me, and it feels very similar with Lampard, doesn't it? It feels that they brought in this guy. Did they know what was going to be the pitfalls of him? It now feels like more of a cynical sort of PR move to get fans back on side. And it's just, I feel that nothing happens at Chelsea in a vacuum for me. I think this all cycles into each other. And I wonder with the recruitment, that's something I want to see moving forward is more, why are we buying a player? What are we going to get from him? Some players are good enough that they'll go over whatever, maybe awkwardness, and they're just so good that they'll work. But I do worry with a younger player like Tchouaméni, if he was to come into the Premier League and we don't really have the best transfer market, and maybe there are certain players still at the club who should have maybe moved on, and that's maybe causing some friction. And Chelsea are a crazy club, aren't they? So I wonder, and this maybe pushes me onto the attacking side of the pitch, because I think that, there's been, of course, many rumours to strikers, and Erling Haaland is the massive one. It's, as I pointed out earlier, no one's going to turn their nose up at Erling Haaland, of course. That's not my point with criticising maybe the recruitment side of things. Of course, you want Erling Haaland. Lukaku's another one, and Lukaku actually interests me because not only the history, narratively, I think it would just, as someone who loves film, I think it would make a lot of sense. It'd be such a nice sort of cycle for his career.
The arc,
the arc, full arc. And you return to the club that basically ditched you, 7 years ago and told you we didn't want you at the time. And he's gone, he's gone to Everton, he's gone to Man United, he's gone to Inter, and now he is one of the best forwards in world football. And I also just think, I don't know if you agree with this, like Lukaku for me is a ready-made forward. He's someone that I just have so much confidence in his history in the Premier League, his physical build. He's developed his all-round game now. There was questions maybe a few years back around that part of his game. No doubts about that for me now, based on what he's doing for Inter at the moment. And I just think if Chelsea want to win the Premier League title next season, they probably need a defensive midfielder. They need a goal scorer. And if we can't get Erling Haaland, I think Lukaku, if we can get him, I just think it would be a ridiculous signing.
Yeah, some really, really good points there. I think the first thing to touch upon is as you say, this kind of lack of connectivity in terms of recruitment is probably, I want to say, maybe the biggest driver in terms of the kind of sort of hodgepodge of squad composition that we see today. One of the common themes, at least, to varying degrees of strength, that a lot of the best clubs in Europe have is, from a recruitment standpoint, they have an idea of the philosophy and the vision and the style. They from a board level, dictate what it is they want to do. And I think Dan Ashworth, the guy at Brighton, said it best recently when he's like, look, the owner and the football people who run this club have a vision. This is how we want to play. This is how we want to recruit. This is a style of play. These are the kind of players we want. And that goes from, the under 11s all the way through to the first team recruitment. And that is their 5-year plan, for example. But when they say 5-year plan, they actually mean 5-year plan. They don't mean, Chelsea's 3-year plan, which is, a year and 2 days or whatever it is, not the 9-month plan. But if you look at, for example, Bayern Munich, fantastic, recruitment strategy. They're looking at basically, okay, we can cherry pick the best players in world football pretty much. We can pick all the best players from Germany. City as well. I think if City lost Pep Guardiola, they have such a good infrastructure in place now that they could go and find a coach who can coach the style of play that Pep Guardiola does. And they could bring him in, and maybe, okay, it's not Pep and all that sort of stuff, but they have the profile of player, they have the right balance of recruitment there. Same, I would say, with maybe Barcelona previously and Real Madrid. And a lot of these clubs have a concept of really sort of solid recruitment. I think with Chelsea, the fact that we almost kind of, we adopt the personality of the incumbent manager. That means, as we know, 18 months is your absolute peak of being a Chelsea manager as things stand. Within 18 months, you can completely disregard, players that you've just spent £150 million on in a transfer window. And that cannot be a sustainable way to build a title-winning squad. Because, you look at what we have now, we've got kind of remnants who can play a back three, a couple of players who don't really see the back three. We've got maybe guys who can't play in the two in midfield, maybe guys who want to play in the three. There's no real kind of structure or any kind of real synergy between, things that have happened. And moving on to sort of the striker point of view, I mean, yeah, we will need, I think, certainly, unless we massively revolutionise the way that we create chances and the way that we play, you need like an elite world-class striker to convert the one or two chances that you may get a game. I'm a big Erling Haaland fan, but the people that are turning their nose up at Romelu Lukaku, I find it peculiar. I mean, he has such an insane goal-scoring record. And I think people still sort of think that he is this sort of one-dimensional, battering ram from maybe at Manchester United. You look at him now at Inter Milan, his body composition, he's completely slimmed down. He's really sort of taken that nutrition and diet side of things seriously. I think he's one of these guys that goes in the gym, looks at a dumbbell and puts on like 10 kilos of muscle. He's really sort of refined that side of his game. And then you look at the general way that he sort of spearheads the attack now. His touch, his link-up play, his ability to be a focal point. He stylistically, and to be fair, Haaland as well, they are the kinds of strikers that Chelsea win titles with. I know that everyone, as you say, the aesthetics, and everyone wants like a little Sergio Aguero who's like a little diminutive player and he's fantastic and he scores all these wonderful goals. Chelsea have won titles by having a battering ram up front who brings everyone else into play, brings the midfield up and scores goals. Diego Costa, Didier Drogba, two of your kind of better examples there. I think Lukaku and Haaland would have similar effects on the team. And again, it's not just the fact that they are both good goal scorers. One of the things that Chelsea need and probably lack at the moment without Olivier Giroud is the ability to just go long occasionally. All this short build up and all this sort of like lovely kind of intricate football. Sometimes you have to sort of keep your opponent honest, and that means chipping one up to the centre forward. Because then that means, okay, now the defensive midfielder might have to sit 5 yards deeper because the second ball and all that sort of stuff. So it's not just the goals, it's not just the assists, it's not just the player that we're looking for. But I think having that profile of player, a Lukaku or Haaland, it changes the way that teams defend against you. Because at the moment, I think we're fairly easy to play against in the final third. We either play with a false nine, so nobody's being marked or picked up, or when we do play a centre forward, Tammy is in okay form at the moment. He's not having the best season, and I think Giroud is playing well, but his lack of mobility, teams know that he's not going to go in behind. They know that they if they can keep him in front of them, then it's sort of generally something that they can deal with.
Sorry to interrupt. It's just also now Giroud to me looks more out of place at Chelsea than he ever has before.
Yeah.
And I think that's because of the style of play, because the style of play isn't really reliant on a bulky forward, a focal point. It's more reliant on interchangeability of movement within a front three, not having a natural forward. It's much more a Pep style of a front three. And of course, that works maybe for Tuchel when it can get him some results. But as you're discussing right now, if you want to win a Premier League title with 38 games, that's where I get back to sort of a bit of a headache, because you're like, well, if we bring in a big striker like that, Tuchel maybe has to sort of tweak what he's doing currently.
Yeah, and I think in an interesting way, what you're saying there, if you were to spend, I mean, the minimum to get Lukaku is probably about £80 million, probably minimum. And you're looking for anything probably up to 130, 140 for Haaland. I think if you're spending that kind of money on a forward, that might actually force his hand in terms of changing the style of play. There is no way that you're looking at that profile of player, that style of centre forward, to play a 7,000 passes per game style of football. You want to be able to also go into them early. You want to occasionally play it over the top. You want to get it, you want to make them the focal point of the style of play. And I don't know whether it's a club decision or it's a Tuchel decision, but the fact that they are the two most heavily linked forwards, to me at least, kind of intimates that there's possibly a style of play change on the horizon, because you're not looking at two gigantic tanks up front. As you say, if you want to play this sort of intricate false nine kind of style of play, which is, really chance creation is all about these perfect passing patterns and everything being completely intricate and perfectly woven together. So maybe, again, looking at this, maybe something I've just stumbled across as we've been speaking, but having that kind of profile of player there maybe suggests that, he does realise in the Premier League, you can play fancy football like City and you can win league titles like that. But that is a style of play that's been developed over an incredibly long period of time now under Guardiola. To have an immediate impact at Chelsea, I think, it does make sense that you're looking at a more physical player. I mean, obviously, both of them are incredibly talented at scoring goals. They're both great finishers. All that sort of stuff is applicable. But the way that you would play with like Aguero, or like an Aguero light forward versus a Haaland or a Lukaku, to me, I think does suggest that potentially the style of play is something that Tuchel is considering changing in the future, because you're not going to get those guys in if you're going to try and play this, false nine system, or a style of play that relies incredibly, is very reliant upon super intricate final third play. Sometimes you just want to play it into your centre forward and have him batter two people and then stick it in the top corner, which is fine by me.
Yes, it's. I think as well. There's with thinking about Costa recently, it was one of my favourite players. In terms of like, I know a lot of Chelsea fans won't agree with this, but of course I have Frank's my favourite player. I think about JT, I think about Didier, but Diego is very, just personally, he's very much up there, even though he left the club in quite a antagonistic way, and he was a very unique character, but he was an amazing footballer as well. I mean, watching that guy live was just incredible. The ability to move in and out of space, the ability to hold up the ball. I think he was as good as Didier, and we know how good Didier was. He as well, some of the goals he scored individually, he sometimes he'd make goals for himself. He wasn't just predominantly most of his goals were inside the 6-yard box. He scored a couple outside the box, but I think he was an amazing forward. So the idea that going for a battering ram is going to lose some quality within this side and going to lose, we want to see us score more goals. So I just think it's a very simplistic thing, isn't it? You want to see the club invest. And I think for me, it's a bit like saying to the club, okay, you want to go back to where you were 10 years ago. It's all about winning the title as soon as possible. Put the money where your mouth is, basically. Go out there and invest in a player who's going to get us that title as soon as possible, if that's what you want. Because I just think currently with the players he has, if we go into next season with basically the same squad, he's going to have to do an incredible job. And I think that the level of... And as well, another point I just want to bring up that's slightly off topic, when we were speaking about the style of play, fans back in the stadium as well. I think about some of the last 20 minutes of games recently where Chelsea have been a little bit passive in 0-0s. I don't think a full Stamford Bridge is going to be dealing with that. I think there's going to be a lot more. Yeah. There's going to be a lot more, and maybe that will have the effect on the players that gets them to be a little bit more progressive and daring in that last 15 minutes of games. But fans, we know what happened with Sarri, are not going to be happy if we're not going for a game that we should be.
Yeah, I think that the points about Costa are really, really critical in terms of trying to sort of understand the progression of this team. And the one thing I think that Costa and certainly Drogba gives you, and probably looking at the forwards we have now, their ability to just occupy a back four, and it doesn't matter if it's playing against 2 centre-backs, 3 centre-backs, or a back four entirely. That kind of profile and that sort of way that they play the game, back to goal, comfortable bringing others into play. I think it's no coincidence that guys like Eden Hazard had incredible seasons when sort of playing off of Costa, and I think you could probably see that potentially with guys like Kai Havertz and Timo Werner and Christian Pulisic and whoever is going to be in those sorts of areas, having the ability to play off someone who can play back to goal, who can actually physically compete with basically an entire defence and occupy them. I think always that was Costa's. People always go, Costa only turned up for half a season and all these sorts of quips about him. I don't believe that for 1 second. Even when he wasn't scoring or having these purple patches of form, the problems that he would pose defences were incredible. We don't win games without Costa's, winding up centre backs or just bullying them or bringing others into play and things like that. And I think that the last point you made there, particularly about kind of fans. And we saw how the kind of the I suppose the relationship with Maurizio Sarri kind of soured. And I think that style of play, that sort of very passive possession based, as you say, if it's 0-0, 85th minute, and we're still passing the ball patiently around in midfield, as much as it's the style of play and that sort of the methodology. I don't know if the the Haaland Glower are going to be too happy to see another pass without actually there being some sense of urgency. So yeah, you could say certainly in a way that maybe the lack of fans has made this transition to this style of play a lot easier. Because again, I don't think it's something necessarily that people would be super happy watching all the time. Not the sort of Atletico games and the games that we've played well in, but these sort of stalemate games that can be a little bit tedious to turn up and just watch the sort of interchange of possession. So yeah, something certainly to contemplate going into next year, particularly with fans coming back into grounds, hopefully. The way that we potentially change the style of play, I think, is something to look forward to.